Welcome. Thank you all for coming. Let me start off by introducing the candidates to you. Chris Carter-Chapman is the Conservative candidate. Luke Viner is with Labour. Miranda Fyfe, next to me here for the Greens, and Pippa Halings, the Liberal Democrat candidate. Now, we did extend an invite to both James Gordon, the Independent, who let us know today he was unable to come, and also to Harrison Edwards, who's the Reform candidate. I'm told that multiple attempts were made to invite him to come along, but sadly he declined the invitation. I'm going to start by asking all of our candidates to make an opening statement. That will be of 2 minutes duration, after which I'll go through my list of questions here. As Claire explained, it's been submitted by readers to the Queen Edith's newsletter, and again, the candidates will have 2 minutes to answer. Don't feel obliged, everybody. If you feel you've run out of things to say after 1 minute 50, everybody will thank you for retaining to those 10 seconds for use later on in the evening. So let's start then with the opening statements. I'll start at this end with Pippa Halings for the Lib Dems.
Thank you. I'm Pippa Halings and I'm from the Liberal Democrats, and it's wonderful to be with you all this evening for all of us to tell you a little bit more about ourselves, why I'm standing, what I care about. Firstly, I'm a mum, and I moved here to South Cambridgeshire with my husband and 2 children in 2012. But as you may hear during the evening from my accent, I grew up in Hull. And my mum was a staff nurse working nights, my dad a GP. And I think it was those deep roots within the NHS, joining my dad on his home visits to patients, that I fostered this sense of community service from a very early age. It also gave me a real sense of the deep inequalities that exist within our communities behind those front doors. And it's that sense of community service that has travelled with me all over. And I've volunteered with our girls' football team here, and also meant that I stood and was elected to the council in 2018 and then re-elected in 2022. When you hear us answering the questions tonight, I hope what you'll hear from me as a Liberal Democrat is that I care deeply about protecting our local environment. I care deeply about the NHS and social care. And my husband's life I owe to Adam Brooks. They saved him from leukemia. And as Liberal Democrats, I care deeply and passionately about giving voice to our local communities in shaping our area. And I know these are values you share. There are 3 reasons why you should vote for me. First, if you give me the honour of electing me as your MP, I will fight hard to represent your voice in decisions made locally or in Westminster. Second, every vote for a Liberal Democrat is for a strong local champion. We'll fight for the NHS, fight for those struggling with rents and mortgages and soaring food
5
prices.
seconds.
And finally, every vote for the Lib Dems is the only party that can unseat the Conservatives here. Enough is enough. Vote Lib Dem.
And Miranda Fyfe for the Greens.
Hello, yes. Is that on? I'm Miranda Fyfe, your Green Party candidate. Here in Queen Edith, you're of course part of the rural leafy Shire constituency of South Cambridgeshire. And you don't need me to tell you that you host within your ward the ever-expanding metropolis of the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. That campus is the key focus of the gravitational pull of so many proposed large infrastructure projects. Working around the city from the west, we have the C2C busway plan, the East-West Rail proposed southern approach, the CSET busway plan, and finally, the proposed relocation of the existing sewage treatment plant to Honey Hill. All 4 of those controversial projects fall within the boundaries of this redrawn parliamentary constituency. No wonder the press have picked up that it's hotly contested. Your neighbours in the rest of Cambridge City kicked out their last Tory MP in 1992. And I'm proud to say that one of the 500-odd votes by which Labour's Anne Campbell won then was mine. And it felt great. But here in Queen Edith's, thanks to the rural Shire having 90% of the votes in this seat, you've had Conservative MPs continuously for nearly 60 years. So I can well imagine how very tempting it is for you to believe the polling, be hypnotised by those bar charts, and simply pick the candidate you're told is most likely to vote Tory, kick out the Tory rather. But you're being played. This time in South Cambridgeshire in 2024, you have no incumbent MP. Instead, you have 6 brand new, worthy candidates to choose from. None of us have done the job before. All of us think we would be capable. And votes cast in 2019 do not roll over. You have a free choice.
5 seconds.
It's up to you to decide who you actually trust to do the best job to represent you.
Thank you, Miranda. And Luke for the Labour Party.
Hello there. Oh, brilliant. Works. My name's Luke Viner. I am the Labour candidate here in South Cambridgeshire. A little bit about myself first, just, it's all very interesting. I live in Fulbourn. I've lived in Fulbourn now for the past 5 years. I actually came here for work purposes just before the pandemic. I work in the tech and security sector and have done this entire time. I'm also a Fulbourn parish councillor and have been for a while now, and I understand the importance of how important it is to have a local voice really representing you in those areas. We've done some good work on that council, and I think I have the experience to fly elsewhere as well. Why am I deciding to do this? And it's a question that I ask myself quite frequently at the moment, I won't lie. But a lot of it is rooted in the same reasons that I joined the Labour Party. And it's because I grew up under a Labour government. And it's going to be the only time I try and mention my age, but I was actually born in 1997, about 20 days after Tony Blair got elected, which means I spent the first half of my life and my education under a Labour government. And it's only really when I became an adult and I look back on that time, I realised how much it affected me and how much it affected my family as well. When I went to school, my class sizes were under 30. My teachers weren't on strike because they were well paid. My teachers didn't have to go to Asda and Tesco to buy school supplies because the local authorities were well funded. I had an NHS that was there for me. I had a few ailments growing up, asthma, eczema, things like that. I had an NHS that was there for me. My parents were able to get me a GP appointment when they needed to, the medicine they needed to when I required it. All these things really, really matter to me, and it's only really when I experienced the second half of my life under the coalition, under the Conservative government, I really realised actually how good we had it and how good I had it, how good my family had it. And we have lost our way over the past 14 years. And I really believe that in South Cambridgeshire, in this election, you have an opportunity to elect a Labour MP that can work, hopefully, with fingers crossed, on July the 5th, with a Labour government to really bring investment, change into this area, and to have that first Labour MP here really doing the work in the community, a local voice for this community. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to the Queen Edith Community Forum. And thank you to Julian.
Thank you, Luke. And finally, Chris Carter-Chapman.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm so sorry for being late. Like Luke, I own an Italian car, and it is a passion rather than a reliable form of transportation. So apologies for being late here this evening. I'm Chris Carter-Chapman. I'm the Conservative Party candidate. I live in the constituency in the beautiful little village of Whaddon. I grew up, spent a lot of my time on a farm near Barton, for those of you who know it. And I went to school here in Cambridge, so I attended St Bede's and then Hills Road, and actually arranged the 2005 general election hustings here at Hills Road, or just down the road. I gather, or I understand from the hustings that we have had so far, that some of my opponents are going to talk at length about the last 14 years of Conservative government, and a spoiler alert, they are not going to give it a 5-star review. And I understand some of the points they're about to make, and I'm going to attempt to rebut them, and I'm not going to pretend for a moment that the last 14 years have been easy. We have had huge international and domestic challenges, whether it be the war in Ukraine, whether it be COVID. We've had to spend billions of pounds in furlough support schemes and energy support payments. But I am standing here as a Conservative because I'm proud of our record on equality. I'm proud that in government we have introduced equal marriage. I'm proud that we've invested record amounts in our NHS, though I know we have much more to do. I'm proud to be involved in the campaigns to get the Cancer Hospital and the Children's Hospital built right here in Addenbrooks. My family have sadly had cause to spend many months of our lives at those hospitals, which I'm sure we'll talk about this evening. I'm proud of our record on policing in this city, where we've got bike crime down by 60%, where we've got burglaries down by 45%, and I'm working with our Police and Crime Commissioner to see that we have a more visible police presence on our streets. So thank you, and I look forward to a robust discussion tonight.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thanks to all our candidates for their opening statements. So, to our questions, and the first question has been sent to us by Vivian Perutz, and Vivian asks, what are the candidates' views on the proposed models for growing Cambridge and meeting its transport requirements, particularly the proposed East-West Railway? And let's start with Miranda on that.
Thank you. Well, I'm a Green Party member. The reason I joined the Green Party was because having read books like Donut Economics and realised that actually the quest for economic growth is mostly what's destroying our environment and destroying our planet and will send us all to oblivion ultimately, I realised that the Green Party has a completely different philosophical view, which I looked up on the website and thought, this is the party for me. So we ascribe to a different model. We need a society that thrives whether or not it grows, rather than the society that needs to grow whether or not it helps us to thrive. So specifically on East-West Rail, I've looked into this at some length. I've studied a lot of the material that Cambridge Approaches have put together, and I've come to the conclusion that it will take far too long, be far too environmentally destructive. The carbon cost of construction alone, the Cambridge Approaches people have calculated, and I can't see any fault in their calculations, will be outweighed by a factor of about 60 any saving from carbon, from modal shift from cars to train. So I'm dead against it. I think what we need, rather in 10 years' time, this very expensive railway to get people from Camborne to Cambridge South, I would suggest somebody quite quickly commission some buses, actual buses that go on the existing roads, because buses can go on existing roads. For the peak hours proposed, East-West Rail are projecting 1,200 passengers. Is it? I was looking.
Well, people like
it's
you
not.
continue.
I've got 20 seconds.
I'm looking at the wrong one. Please continue,
Right,
and
so
I will.
thank you.
I will adjust the time.
East-West Rail projecting 1,200 passengers at the peak hour. Now, that number of passengers would fit on 15 buses. So let's put on 18 buses. You could have 6 from Bedford, 6 from Camborne, and 6 from St Neots. And of those, so every 10 minutes from each of those destinations, express buses. Some of them could go to the Science Park at Milton, some of them could go straight to the biomedical campus, and some of them could come into town. That would transport the number of people that apparently would use East-West Rail in that time much cheaper, and we could do it next month, frankly.
Sorry, Miranda, my timing was like some of the buses on that one. Let's move to Chris for his view next.
So Miranda and I are in full agreement on East-West Rail, and I think we are probably the only two candidates you're going to hear from tonight who think that that railway is proposed to be in completely the wrong location. So there were 6 original alignments that the railway could have been built along. They have chosen by far what I deem, Miranda I think deems to be the worst, whether you look at it on carbon emissions, whether you look at it on freight capacity, whether you look at it on cost. All of the pain will fall on the South Cambridgeshire area and the communities across it. There will be no new stations built along the route. They will run diesel trains down it. It will cut through an Iron Age burial site. It will cut through people's gardens, communities. The reverberations from it will potentially interfere with the radio telescope. There are so many reasons why it should not be built. What we should be doing is putting money into exploration around light rail, which I've been calling for over the 2 years that I've been campaigning against East-West Rail. Many of you will have used tram systems across the country and indeed across Europe. Cambridge is crying out for that level of infrastructure that will be connected with its satellite villages and towns. I'd like to see the Greater Cambridge Partnership abolished, and I publicly called for it to be so. And the vast quantities of money that it's wasting on things like congestion charge planning, that was £4.7 million worth of your money they spent on that failed scheme, and money that they've spent on busways that nobody wants, cutting through Coton Orchard or the gogmagogs. We can make a real stand for nature and better public transport in the same breath. That's why I'm opposing East-West Rail, and that's why I want to see light rail on the agenda moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Let's go to Luke.
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. I think mostly because we're not only talking about growth and housing, but obviously we're talking about transport as well. And obviously as a young person, housing is particularly of interest to me because the chances of me really owning a home nowadays are pretty much non-existent. And it's a real shame. I think this conversation really started, especially around here, getting really quite large when we heard about Michael Gove's plans for 250,000 new homes in this area, very, very top-down programme. And I think that was very misguided. I think if we're going to have new homes built, and I think we do need to, it needs to be driven locally and it needs to be done in cooperation with local people and local councils. Moving on to transport, though, it's definitely a massive thing. I'm going to touch on both of these things. Firstly, on buses, because one of the things we want to do with buses, and it's in the Labour manifesto, and Dr. Nick Johnson, our wonderful mayor, has been trying to push for this for a while now, is franchising of bus services, which will give local authorities control over the timetables, the routes and the fares of those buses. And I think that will make a massive contribution. Andy Burnham does a very good job up in Manchester with his B network, and we should be doing something similar here. The changes in our manifesto for government will make legislation easier to pass for franchising in this area, and I hope to see that happen. When it comes to East-West Rail, I'm a big believer that we need to expand our railway network. I think one of the worst things we did as a country was shut down all of our train networks in the 1950s. But I'm also a big believer that if you're going to have a national infrastructure project in your area, you should be able to benefit from it. And one of the big problems I have with East-West Rail at the moment, for example, is there's no station, as Chris mentioned, between Camborne and Cambridge South. I would like to lobby for a station to be there. There was supposed to be a consultation this month, actually, in Haslingfield in person, and unfortunately, because of the election, it got cancelled. But, you know, I can hopefully try and lobby for that as an MP. The second thing, and I'm running out of time, is it's a diesel line, and I think it shouldn't be. It absolutely needs to be electrified, and the fact that we're trying to build a diesel line in 2024 is absolutely asinine to me. Thank you.
And finally to Pippa.
Yes, thank you very much. Having been on the District Council, which together with the City Council forms part of the Greater Cambridge Shared Planning Service, I was chair of the Planning Committee for a couple of years and then chair of the Climate Change and Environment Advisory Committee. So this speaks to me very personally because I've done a deep dive to try and understand how we can strengthen both local community voice in shaping the future of our area, but also protect our local environment. And there is a need. There is a need for homes for young people and key workers. That's evidence. We've got objectively identified housing waiting lists. So there's an absolute need. And the people who are working here are priced out of the market and are being forced into absolutely awful commutes from places too far away from their place of work. So it is our duty and obligation to be able to provide homes for our young people and for the key workers that are working in the hospitals and everywhere. And that's why the local planning process, which Lib Dems believe in localism, empower an emergent local planning process. We have one of the most ambitious for house building, but also with the highest environmental standards, which the Conservatives in December have weakened all environmental protections for housing and for development, which is something, one of the reasons I want to...
The question was East-West Railway.
Is that about housing?
We may do housing later, so don't get too excited.
Come into connectivity. So those people who are living in the places that have been designed need connectivity. And for East-West Rail, it is a complete botched job, and let us say, by the Conservative government and their East-West Rail company, with a massively environmentally damaging scheme and design. Now, when Chris says that he's completely against it, I know that he was with Rishi Sunak last week, reported Rishi saying, East-West Rail is a project. I have beside me Chris Carter-Chapman and Lucy Fraser, the former MP. Chris Carter-Chapman is saying no to the southern route, and Lucy Fraser, who stands for the northern route, is saying no to the northern route. Meanwhile, Antony Brown, our former MP for South Cambridgeshire, is now standing in a different constituency where he thinks it's a great idea because the people of Camborne want it. What I would do is, as MP, convene all those responsible for transport authorities, bash their heads together and get a joined up strategy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still no answer.
Some of the questions are obviously going to overlap onto each other a little bit, but if we try and sort of channel our thoughts towards the question in hand. Now, question number 2. This is from Sarah Nicholas, and she says, we are aware of the Conservative Party position through Michael Gove's case for Cambridge, but what are the other parties' visions for Cambridge over the next 30 years? Are they looking to create a development corporation to deliver the growth? It seems appropriate to start with Chris on this, and there has been, I guess, the beginnings of a development corporation coming together, but not one which has necessarily spoken to the people of Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire just yet. Chris.
Well, Sarah, thank you for your question. The ambition of building more houses locally is one that I think everyone on this panel shares. The questions we're going to be answering tonight is where should those houses go, and is the infrastructure there to support them? Now, I've long been on record that locations for house building locally, Bourne Airfield, Marshall's Airfield, former brownfield sites that can sustain that level of building, not greenbelt land, not tier 1 greenbelt land. And a moment ago we were talking about the loss of vast swathes of greenbelt land that would result from East-West Rail. I note we didn't actually get a Pippa's position on that. Ed Davey, of course, stated the other day that he was pro it happening here. So I think there's a difference between the rhetoric and what's actually happening on the ground. Now, we know we have a serious water shortage problem in the area. We could potentially sustain, the Environment Agency thinks, no more than 9,000 new homes at the moment. So the sorts of numbers that were in the case for Cambridge are not rooted in any form of reality. And I've said that publicly. And I have no bones about putting that to Michael Gove, who's obviously standing down at this election. Do we need houses for key workers? Do we need houses for our families in this area? Of course we do. And there are infill housing developments across South Cambridgeshire that are some of the foremost examples of how you can achieve that. But mass Camborne-style developments or Thacum-style developments I have absolutely unequivocally opposed. And as your Member of Parliament, I would not rest in ensuring that they do not proceed.
Thank you, Chris. Pippa.
Thank you. I think perhaps Chris should stand as an independent then. The case for Cambridge by Michael Gove, and affirmed twice in the Chancellor's audits, giving money for the growth for Cambridge. We have already started. So we already have the Cambridge Delivery Group, which is headed by Peter Freeman from Homes England. It does not have the planners who have been developing the emerging local plan in a rigorous local plan process. Does not have them as members of that. Does not have members of the local authorities and elected members on that. They are part of an advisory body to the Cambridge Delivery Group. And it has already set in place the creation of a development corporation. I'll be interested to hear from Luke whether the Labour government would want to continue that. For Liberal Democrats, we believe in localism, in the power of local government and local communities to shape our future. The case for Cambridge rides roughshod over local democracy, ignores the water supply crisis, and is looking, particularly in this area, at expanding the development from where we're looking at the expansion of the Cambridge Biomedical Campus all the way out to Great Shelford, along the side to the Magogs, and then over to the main highway, including the Nine Wells Local Nature Reserve. That is the area of the urban quarter by Michael Gove that could be for those 150,000 plus homes. We do not agree with that. What we agree with is a plan-led process with a land use framework that says what should all types of land be used for. And that is what we would have for ourselves in terms of the Liberal Democrats. And that then links obviously to infrastructure. I'll let you know that the other changes by the Conservative government in December to the National Planning Policy was to remove infrastructure first obligations on developers.
Thank you very much, Pippa. Luke, Development Corporation, will that continue under Labour?
Not that I'm aware of. So, I haven't heard anything about it. So, Yes, this 250,000 thing, I mentioned it in my opening, in the first question actually. I think it's very misguided. I don't think it is the right strategy for Cambridge, and I think basically every single local council in this area, whether it be Lib Dem, Labour, Conservative, whatever, has said that this is not going to be the best idea going forward. What I would like to see is more housing. Of course, I spoke earlier about how important this is to me. I'm going to quickly humour you with a quick anecdote. Just to show how much it's a problem nowadays. When I was born in a very weird situation where my parents actually bought a house in the same street as my grandparents. And when my grandparents bought their first house, it was for £6,500, same spec as my parents' house that they bought, which is about 47,000. A bungalow went in the same street recently for 250,000. This is the sort of trajectory that we're on right now. It makes things very difficult for us if you want to get onto the housing ladder as younger people. We also have the issue of water. If we're going to build lots of houses in this area, we can't really do that because we have quite a lot of water issues. One of the things we want to push forward on is making sure that any new builds that are done are extremely water efficient, because we can at least then keep the water quantity going down as well. And also to do with infrastructure, we want to make sure that the infrastructure is there first as well. If you're going to have any new developments, Northstowe is the best example of this. Camborne can also be another one, but Northstowe is a good example. They don't even have a co-op, let alone a doctor's surgery. And it's the biggest new build town since Milton Keynes. So this is the big problem that we're experiencing right now. I'm going to quickly finish on something that's very passionate to me as well, because we always seem to talk about market housing. Social housing and council housing is extremely important too. And the Labour Council around here in Cambridge actually have a very good record on this. They're building the second most council houses in the entire country after Birmingham, which is the biggest local authority in Europe. So we can do it. We can collaborate with our local councils to do this, and that's what I would like to see going forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Luke. And finally, Miranda.
Thank you. Yes, well, the Development Corporation, God help us. Let's just hope that Luke's new Labour government does get rid of it. But I am concerned because the way Keir Starmer talks about wanting to outgrow the Tories, I fear that the greed and the lust for economic growth, which has driven this Development Corporation, will mean that, who knows, they might well hang on to it. In terms of housing, of course we need new housing. And as Pippa well knows, and she spelt some of it out, we already have a local plan. We already have thousands and thousands of housing coming down the line, being built, whether it's the other half of Waterbeach being built, the other half is going through planning. There is housing already in our local plan, which should be sufficient for our housing needs. But of course, we have already outgrown our water supply, and this is an issue which the Green Party city councillors were kind of poo-pooed for raising a few years ago and told not to be silly. Now it's something that all the councillors of all parties have realised really is a big issue. It seems to suddenly in the last year everyone's seen the light. There's a lot of talk about technology. There's a lot of talk about, we've got to make new houses water efficient. I'm a great believer in actually what we need is behaviour change, which of course doesn't involve people selling stuff to you like new shower heads, but it can make a huge difference in people's domestic water use. And I think even if we didn't build any new houses, we need to get down the domestic water use. I would, if elected as an MP, I would ask the Public Health Authority to change their hand washing advice, for instance. You don't need to run the tap while you're soaping up for those 20 seconds. You don't need to wash in hot water, so you don't need to run it through to hot. We need to fix the loos. Everyone's got a dual flush, but no one knows which one's the long flush and which one's the short flush, and they probably don't work. We need to fix that. We've got to have universal metering.
5 seconds.
And we've got to have tiered pricing so that the more you use, it's much too expensive, and therefore everyone will reduce their use.
Thank you very much. Okay, to our third question, which is from Vic Morris, and Vic says, I understand that the South Cambridgeshire constituency is essentially a new constituency following the recent boundary changes. I'm looking at my colleague Phil Rogers over there. It's, I guess not about half is old South Cambs. There's something like that, isn't it? Could the candidates comment on the validity of comparing the 2019 results in South Cambs with the new constituency, and what the impact of the boundary changes might be? I'm going to start with Luke, with a nod to my friend from Cherry Hinton in the audience.
Well, yes, Cherry Hinton's are normally a very good thing. We have brilliant Labour councillors in Cherry Hinton, and it's great to have them in the constituency. I've done quite a bit of canvassing now all around the new constituency, and actually it's been extremely positive. Got quite a few boards up now, lots of posters going up, lots of people really receptive to our message, and I think it just goes to show, I mean, Miranda touched on it earlier, in 2019, not only did you have old boundaries, we had a situation where we were dealing with the big B word, Brexit. We were dealing as well in my party, unfortunately, with a situation where we had a leader that wasn't necessarily the most popular among a lot of people. And it's just a very different time now. 2024 is not 2019. And we have an opportunity here, I said it in the beginning, to really move forward and hopefully elect a Labour MP that could work with the Labour government to push in this area. And I really do think, given the conversations that I've had, that chance is possible. And we shouldn't really be massively comparing things to before, when the situation now is very, very different. So that's my opinion, and that's what I've seen.
Okay. Thank you very much, Luke. Chris, you're the former MP, as technically must call him, Antony Brown, has sort of headed to St Neots and Mid-Cams. I always need to get the precise name for that new constituency correct. How do you see the remaining part of South Cambs?
Well, Vic, thank you for your question. Obviously, the constituency has been split in two, and as we've said, 60% of it now sits in the new South Cambs. So in answer to the part of your question where it says, what is the validity of comparing them, actually, there's very little cause to compare those two results. Now, I was out and about on the doorsteps today, and there are increasing numbers of stickers going up on people's doors saying, no more political literature, I'm sick of it. But today I saw one that said, no more Liberal Democrat bar charts, which I was very pleased to see, because they are an absolute nonsense. And the idea that you have to vote because only this colour or this colour or this party can knock out the Tories. If you want to knock out the Tories and knock me out, I quite understand. But you should vote for the candidate who you want to represent you. Is your candidate talking about the local issues that you worry about? I, of course, went to school in Cherry Hinton, and I live in one of the most rural parts of the constituency. I know what the challenges are, both ends of this constituency, and they are very, very different. We have an urban area that has challenges that are very, very different to the rural community in which I live, where we have rural crime, and the crime levels that we're dealing with in the two areas have very different solutions. So tonight, really do interrogate us on what we will do for your community, and don't be told you have to vote a certain way because the magic bar chart tells you to.
Seems only fair to go to Pippa next. I like a good bar chart, mate. Don't understand them.
Thank you very much. So there are proof points when you're looking at, if I want to make a strategic choice, because actually we've had 14 years of absolute chaos and neglect and undermining of our public services and lack of propriety, decency and integrity, undermining what politics stands for, then I want to know how to get the Tories out. So that's a reasonable question to ask. So what we've done with our bar charts is basically to say, well, in 2019, against the national swing that was towards Boris Johnson's supermajority, that everyone should be scared of supermajority, against Boris Johnson's supermajority of 80, in South Cambridgeshire, it bucked that trend. So the incumbent MP at that time won, Antony Brown won the seat by 2,904 votes. So that was one of the closest marginal seats in the country. Then what happened? 2022, in that 60% of what was South Cambridgeshire, the part of that was district council, there were the local elections. And in those local elections, there was a vote of confidence for Liberal Democrat councillors, who, having overturned the majority of the district council in 2018, not only maintained that, but actually increased the number of councillors that we have, reducing them to just 8 councillors out of 43 on South Cambs District Council. So showing that perhaps there wasn't so much trust in the Conservatives at that time. But obviously, 2019, with the different constituencies, isn't the same. So one tactical voting site has done a notional reckoning of if the same wards that we now have in the new constituency that was the same constituency in 2019, and they were looking at the sort of the box counts and the record of voting in those wards. They came up with a notional bar chart, and that is what we use on our leaflets. And if you're interested in tactical voting sites, Best for Britain, Vote Climate, tactical voting, they all say vote Lib Dem, but actually the real answer to this question is we shouldn't have to do this. If we had electoral reform, if we had proportional representation, every vote would count.
And finally to Miranda.
You saved the best till last again, you see. I'm a scientist by education and by outlook, and I've said before, when I look at any kind of chart, I just think about the context. What does that tell us? And as we've said, in 2019, it was all about Brexit, and specifically in our South Cambridgeshire seat, the Green Party stood aside. There was a pact between the Green Party, the Lib Dems, and Plaid Cymru, and in this seat, the Green Party chose to stand aside to give the Liberal Democrats the best chance of beating the Tory, and of course it did nearly work. But that was then, and now, as I've said earlier, you have 6 very worthy candidates. You have a genuine Green Party candidate to vote for. You also have a Reform candidate to vote for, which you didn't have in 2019, and you have a very strong independent. And it's a shame James isn't here because, if I wasn't voting for myself, I might well vote for James. In terms of the boundary changes, because obviously you're here and you haven't changed, I would say what's changed, there's one extra city ward involved in Cherry Hinton. But in terms of Pippa said that in 2022 the Lib Dems got a vote of confidence, 4 years after they took over the district council. I don't know. My take on that, as a South Cambridgeshire citizen voter, would be, in 2018, we voted in the district council, specifically in my village. I'm a fellow parent at the primary school at the time with the guy who got re-elected. He promised they would stop the busway that was coming past our village. Now that's not happening. That was 2018. So, 2019, they were still riding high. We still trusted the Liberal Democrats. We gave them lots of votes. 2022, yes, okay, we did re-elect them. But since May 2022, the Liberal Democrat-controlled district council in cahoots with the GCP have brought us the congestion charge and all sorts of other things. So we're not so keen on them anymore.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Now, to our next question. This one, I'm going to do a little bit different. It comes from the charity Cambridge Past, Present and Future. You'll be familiar with them, as Cambridge's largest civic society, working to protect the local heritage and nature of Cambridge and the surrounding countryside and villages. Now, the question. Our local councils are progressing plans for nearly 50,000 homes to be built by 2041. However, we spoke about this a little earlier, Michael Gove's case for Cambridge is to build 150,000 homes, and that's brought the growth of Cambridge into national politics. A questioner would like to hear from each of the candidates. I'm going to do the first one. I've asked for a yes or no answer, so let's see if we can get one, shall we? Yes or no, is the growth of Cambridge a matter to be decided locally or by national government? Pippa, yes or no?
Well,
it's an either or.
You've just said either or.
Is the growth of Cambridge a matter to be decided? It's the question. Okay. Is the growth of Cambridge a matter to be decided locally? Yes or no? Let's phrase it that way.
Yes.
Okay. Miranda?
Yes.
Yes, it should have local conjunction.
Yes, it
Chris?
should. Yes.
Last, we've got some agreement. This is good. I like it. A more detailed answer. Is your party planning to expand...
Can I get 2 questions?
No, it's just a bonus question here. It's like a game show. Is your party planning to expand Cambridge above what is planned through the local plan? Remember, this is being recorded and we can play it back at the next Hustings, whenever that might be. Pippa?
No, we are part with Cambridge City Council with the Greater Cambridge Local Plan, which with huge rigour has had to look at an objectively identified housing need, and so the answer is no, I think.
Miranda?
No, absolutely not beyond the current local plan. And as I said, we've got serious issues and we need to manage the resources we are using much better before we even really continue with that local plan.
Luke?
I said it earlier, not of my understanding, and same thing with the Development Corporation as well.
And Chris?
No, the party will listen to the views of local people across the constituency who've said no mass house building here. They've said our water can't support it, the infrastructure is not there, and you will have seen in the various versions of this document, you've heard different numbers bandied around tonight, 150,000, 100,000. The latest estimates are now between 50 and 100,000, which is exactly what the Liberal Democrat local plan is calling for.
Do we think, and I'll get a single answer from everybody on this, the incoming government, of whatever colour it might be, are they going to have a plan along the lines of what the Michael Gove's 2040 put forward? Chris?
No.
Again, not of my understanding, no.
No.
Not if I have anything to do with it, if you elect me as your MP.
Okay, let's see what happens. As I say, it's being recorded, so we can we can test the answer to this in a few years' time. Move on to another planning-related question here. How do you feel about the Coton busway? I've alluded to this a little earlier on, and the southern approach for east-west rails, taking in a couple of themes from earlier on. Our questioner, who's Jill Buckingham, says that both take a worrying amount of land. I'll start with Miranda on this one.
Lovely, my favourite topic, thank you. Well, as keen readers of the Cambridge Independent will see, I actually went and essentially launched my campaign for the parliamentary seats in Coton Orchard. I met there with Natalie Bennett and we had a lovely conversation with Anna Gaisley, I think it is, who runs the orchard. It's atrocious. It's just such a stupid plan. I mean, you know, as I said earlier about in terms of what we could do instead of East-West Rail, buses run on roads. I've been saying this for 10 years, ever since, well, certainly 8 years, since I live in Stapleford, so the other busway, which is now called CSETS, is very much in our minds. And from 2016 it was when the concept drawings were first commissioned. Goodness knows how many hundreds of thousands or millions of pounds they spent on those. When somebody in London, I think, drew a line on a map and said, let's have a busway. Just need more buses on the roads. Obviously, thanks to the Thatcherite government, we have a stupid way of doing buses here. But, you know, we've got bus companies that are supposed to be private companies, aren't they? But they don't act like private companies. They don't chase business. They don't try and grow their business. They don't try and compete with their competitors, who would be cars. Wouldn't it be nice to have private bus companies who actually did try to grow their business, find new routes, attract customers from anywhere other than on their own buses? There are lots of adverts for buses on buses, inside buses. I've seen them because I do use the buses. So Coton Orchard, no, we don't even need an on-road alternative. I would say we just need more buses. I stood with Natalie Bennett for 25 minutes waiting for the bus from near Coton Orchard back into town because they only run every 30 minutes. If those buses were every 5 minutes, there'd be a lot more people using them. And we also need tap-on, tap-off technology. I've been on holidays in Brighton and Plymouth. It's simple, tap-on, tap-off. You don't need an account. You don't need an app. You just need a contactless card. And it caps your fee, so you don't have to think.
Perfect, thank you. Go with Pippa next on this one.
Yeah, and I hear the concerns, and they are very loud, and a lot of people are quite rightly, organising themselves to raise their concerns about both of these schemes, both C2C and the East-West Rail Southern approach. But anyone who says that the answer to this is simple, I don't think is being honest. We've heard here that we do support, from everybody saying we support the need for homes, and we support the local plan process. And in the local plan process, Camborne, as a large town, was created, predicated on the need for a dedicated busway. Not for buses on roads, a dedicated busway. And it's been 8 years still, and it still isn't happening. And we've had letters from the sixth form college heads saying that young people are having their post-16 opportunities in this place with the best sixth form education curtailed if they don't have parents with a car who can take them backwards and forwards to schools and extracurriculars. We can't have that kind of inequality in our area. Then it's down to the route. What I've called for on C2C is an expanded scope of the public inquiry. so that we don't just look at the fact there'll be a public inquiry because of compulsory approaches of CPPF land, but also to put out in the public domain and not let GCP mark its own homework, the reality of the decision between on-road and off-road. I've heard both sides. We need to have that debate out in the open with others, with the inspector looking at that, to make sure that we minimise the environmental damage, but we do have the busway. On the southern route for East-West Rail, with the incoming government, I think it was absolutely right to stop the statutory consultation. It will be a decision for the incoming government whether, one, there is a business case for rail, and if there is, if it's electrified, that will change the whole design of this route. And it would have to bring benefits. Only if those three things were there would then I engage and make sure our concerns are voiced there. Thank you.
Thank you, Pippa. I'll go with Chris next.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is where the rhetoric and the reality come into very, very sharp focus, because when we first look at Coton Orchard, we had a Hustings there, or most of us, earlier this year, and Pippa called for a public inquiry as a way of dealing with it, and Luke very rightly pointed out, well, there's already going to be a public inquiry, and I hear tonight it's changed to an expanded public inquiry. We have all the information we need on this issue. It was put before the county council. Every single Liberal Democrat councillor and every single Labour councillor voted to put that busway through that orchard and to concrete over that ecosystem. Every single Conservative said this is in completely the wrong place, it doesn't serve the community, it costs much, much more money than the alternative. Do you know you would save £90 million by moving it just slightly north to an on-road section, and you would save that ancient orchard, which I first visited as a child, and I recommend to all of you to go and see the devastation that would be done by this completely unnecessary GCP fantasy of an infrastructure policy. It's in completely the wrong place. Cambourne desperately needs its connectivity. It could get that via East-West Rail going north, which is where it should go, which comes on to the second part of the question, because then you would run it from Cambourne through Northstowe, and the people of Northstowe would bite your hand off for a station. They are desperate for one, and then it would go into Cambridge North. The southern route decimates 13 villages, all of which I have visited, met with the people in every single one of them. They are absolutely terrified about the impact that this route is having. You need an MP who is unequivocal on these issues, and I will not stop fighting until we stop the southern approach for East-West Rail and we stop C2C destroying Coton Orchard.
And finally on this one to Luke.
Yeah, I'm livid because Chris stole my line. I'm normally the one who calls out Pippa for calling for an inquiry that's already going to happen. The inquiry will happen, and rightfully so. We need to make sure that the public have their say. That's the way the legislative process works. It's a shame that this has taken about 8 to 10 years, but this is where we are. I visited the orchard as well. I think if you're going to have an opinion on this issue, you should actually go down and have the respect to look at it, talk to the people there, understand what's going to be going on. One of the big things that and obviously we had the Hustings on it as well, one of the big things that I've been trying to advocate for a long time, and Chris has mentioned it a few times as well, is light rail, and how we can find a way to get light rail in Cambridge. Obviously it's going to cost a lot of money, and one of the things you need for light rail is dedicated tracks. Now, I've been assured repeatedly that these busways, specifically the C2C one, is future-proof so that one day we can put a light rail system on it. And if we want to have a light rail system, I see that as a good piece of the puzzle to at least start that moving. And also, the residents of Cambourne, the people that are there, are going to desperately need this. They are in a transport desert at the moment, quite frankly. And we hear about this on-road solution as well, but there are massive issues with that. It goes and will cut into the American cemetery and also a site of special scientific interest in the wood. So it's not just a very easy solution. There's a reason why this has taken 10 years, you know. So that's where we are with that. East-West Rail, I spoke a bit about it earlier. My big things, like I said, are I want the local area to benefit from it. I think a new station is required. I'd like it to be electrified. There's also an additional thing as well with the current route. We actually have the opportunity to create a new Cambridge East railway station in between Fulbourn and Cherry Hinton, which I think would be a fantastic opportunity to really unlock those areas there, especially with the new housing that's going to be built on the airfield and is currently being built on the airfield. But I'm going to end on bus franchising. I did talk about it a bit earlier, but that is going to be the real way we can unlock this transport issue. If we're going to start somewhere, let's start at franchising. We've got the powers to do that. We've got the mayor. Let's get a Labour government, get in, change the legislation, at least get local control over our buses. It's essential to move forward in this country. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Luke. And thank you, everyone, on that question. Our next question. How do you feel about the Conservative plan to clarify the Equality Act with special reference to women's rights and children's safeguarding? I'm going to start, I think, with Chris on this one, although I know that I think Labour have been saying some things today on that. But Chris, you go first.
So this is obviously an extremely difficult issue, and I think at each of the hustings that we have discussed it, I have wanted, and I think all the panel have wanted, to discuss it in a way that is respectful to all those involved, because tempers and passions on this issue, and I was intercepted by various campaign members after some of the hustings who rightfully feel very strongly about these issues. I think it's really important that we talk about a single-sex space, safe spaces for people who are male or female, and that is their gender of birth. And I think that those people who say that this is unnecessary, I think that we've had some examples in recent months where having a safe sex space for someone of that biological gender, there is a case for it. And I don't feel that saying that is in any way detrimental to members of the trans community who deserve respect and compassion and should not be made to feel in any way that this is discrimination against them. But I also feel that those people who have said, we believe that there is a case for those single-sex spaces, have been shut down in public discourse in a way that I think is unsavoury. I believe that the entire debate is the problem. There is no debate. Trans people exist. They deserve respect.
Thank you.
They do not deserve to be used as a political football, and there are members of my party who I'm ashamed to say have done that, and I don't stand with them.
Good.
Thank you very much, Chris. Luke?
Yeah, I want to echo what Chris has said. I'm very glad he has said it because it's extremely important. It has become a very unfortunate, toxic debate. I have many trans friends myself who have felt in the past couple of years it's been extremely difficult for them because they always feel like they're being judged in massive ways, even compared to what's happening 10 years ago. I mean, in this country in 2004, the Labour Party passed the Gender Recognition Act. We passed that, and it allowed you to legally change your gender. And it was a landmark piece of legislation. It's been legislation for 20 years now. And it's extremely important that that obviously remains. We spoke a minute ago about safe spaces as well. Of course, that's important when it comes to things like rape shelters, when it comes to places like prisons and things like that. Of course, we have to take that into consideration when it comes to biological sex. But, you know, trans people do exist. They're part of society. They've been part of society for God knows how long, and we have to make sure that we respect them, that we treat them with respect, and we understand that legally there are people that walk around this country who are trans, who on their birth certificate, on all of their documentation, says that they are the gender that they have written onto it because they have gone through the procedure to get their gender recognition certificate. And that's right and that's fair, and we have to treat them with respect.
And the issue of women's rights and children's safeguarding within that? Well,
I don't think there really is much of a safeguarding issue. I mean, quite frankly, no, I'll be honest, no. I'll tell you what, it's akin to what we saw in the 1980s, actually, with gay men. When they got told, when they got told, if you let gay men into changing rooms, then they'll assault people. It's the same exact argument that's just being used on trans people. It's disgraceful. It's disgusting. There is a process going forward, and there is a process when it comes to safe spaces. But quite frankly, this debate has just become extremely toxic. And I just want to, we're a very tolerant country. Britain is a very tolerant country. I'm very proud to be a Brit because of that reason, and I want to see that going forward as well.
Okay, thank you, Luke.
Thank you. We all deserve safety, don't we? Safety from violence. Now, I'm fortunate. I am a woman. I was born a woman, and I'm still a woman. I've grown up in an atmosphere of quite a lot of prejudice against me. A lot of, as I'm sure has Pippa, we're probably similar ages. I really feel for the girls these days, though, because the pressure from social media and so on, must be awful, and clearly it is awful. But I've never had the misfortune to have physical violence against me, but I've had plenty of aggression and bullying from men in all sorts of situations. Most recently, I actually got a crime number because I was on my bicycle cycling, minding my own business, cycling in my now quite aggressive cycling way that I do, maintaining my position on the road, and a car coming the other way who wanted to overtake a parked car didn't like the fact that I was holding my position, and I basically made him stop. And he shouted at me and reversed his car, and his parting words were, "I hope you die a horrible death on that bike." Thank you. So, I didn't have his number plate. The police can't do anything, but I was so shocked that I did actually report it, and I have a crime number. What's the solution to that? Do we ban all men from driving because, some men are violent? You take the argument, but, there might be some people of all sorts of persuasions who are violent and awful, but you can't ban all that type of person. In terms of the Equality Act, just to try and lighten the mood a bit, there are things I think are wrong with the Equality Act. I'm left-handed, and why isn't left-handedness a protected characteristic? I am one of about 10% of the population, and it's okay for the whole world to be the wrong way round for me, and apparently that's not discrimination.
My friend knows a shop where they sell like left-handed scissors and things like that.
We shouldn't need our own shop.
No. Pippa.
Yeah, and so the question, first of all, it was about the Equality Act. So we would uphold the Equality Act. We would allow for no erosion of the Equality Act. We're very proud of it. The Lib Dems also in their constitution are very proud to defend and protect the rights of people of all sexual orientation and gender identity, including both trans and non-binary. And there is an omission there, which is about non-binary people and their identity. And when we talk then about safeguarding and protecting women in spaces, I do want to talk about that because I have worked in this. And the greatest violence against women at the moment, which I wish as much attention and campaigning was going into, was about misogyny and violence against women by men. We have the Sarah Everard murder, where women went out onto the streets to protest about the fact that where they must have felt the greatest protection was in fact where Sarah Everard was at the most vulnerable from the police. And women were hustled off the street during that protest. Secondly, as Lib Dems, what we would do is say we would make misogyny a hate crime. We have to tackle this deep-rooted prejudice within our society. We have to teach it in the schools. We have to educate both girls and boys, men and women about this and make women be safe, and young girls, like my daughter, be safe. The most dangerous place for a woman is in her home. Right now, there is a murder case going on for one of our leafy Shire villages. 46-year-old mother of 2 teenagers murdered in her bed, allegedly by her husband. This is what we should be talking about, and this is what we should be working towards. We would be funding rape crisis centres and funding the legal system for legal aid for those who are subjects and victims of that kind of crime. That's really protecting women's rights.
Thank you very much. Right, we have 2 more questions to come. This one is from Nate Perkins, and Nate says, what will your party do about the, his words, unfair and biased current system of voter ID that means that the younger and poorer members of our community are effectively stopped from voting? Do you want to take that one first, Miranda?
The Green Party have made a commitment in their manifesto to repeal the voter ID system. We would also expand voting to 16-year-olds. Obviously, we would like to replace first past the post with a sensible, proportional representation system. That's, of course, in the manifesto. But, I have to say the Green Party have learned, like the Liberal Democrats, how to actually win under first past the post with a targeted campaign.
Okay, thank you. Pippa.
Yep, absolutely unfair. And in terms of evidence, there's so little evidence of the proportionality of the supposed fraud that this was supposed to deal. We had evidence from the first local government elections, how many young people were disenfranchised by this system. So we knew that before coming into this general election. So we would repeal voter ID. We don't believe it. It can't be possible, that a bus pass for an old age pensioner serves, but a bus pass for a young student does not serve at the ballot box. It's absolutely ridiculous. And we too believe in our young people, and we would give the vote to 16-year-olds. Thank you.
And we'll go to Luke next.
We want to expand the franchising as well to 16-year-olds, but also on top of that, we want to make sure that everyone is able to vote if they're able to vote. And one of the biggest things, I found it myself. I remember when I was doing the Mid-Bedfordshire by-election, I knocked on this guy's door, and he had lived there all his life. And I said, are you going to vote? He said, oh yeah, I'm going to vote Labour. I can't wait to do it. I said, oh, you got your ID for you? He said, what? I said, oh, have you got your ID? He's like, no, I don't have my ID. I went, oh, have you not got a passport, driver's license, anything like that? He went, no. I went, well, because there's no free ID. The government issued free ID way too late for this opportunity. He couldn't vote that day. And that to me is absolutely insane, especially when every single time we have had an election, I think in the last election, 2017, the data was from, I think we had 2 cases of voter fraud, one of which ended in conviction. So we're disenfranchising all these people for what is essentially one case of voter fraud, and we spent a lot of money doing it as well. Is another thing as well. It cost a lot of money to do. These IDs, these free IDs aren't free, they're paid for by taxpayers, okay? So you're expanding that. We had a very good system. The Conservatives, actually, I will say this, the Conservatives love to talk about tradition and keeping things the same, the bedrock of our electoral system. This has been our system for the past 100 years, and suddenly they changed it. Pippa talked about how younger people's bus passes don't count, but older people's do. I wonder why they did that. It's very easy if you think about it.
Chris.
Well, it's incredibly sad that we've had to introduce this piece of legislation, but I am a little bit surprised by some of my co-panelists saying that there are no examples of voter fraud. Having helped a citizen group in London that took the mayor of Tower Hamlets to court over the issue, he was removed from office for corrupt and illegal practices. And in that borough, I have personally seen examples of voter fraud, and there was voter fraud changing the results, it turned out, during the outcome of the legal case, in multiple council wards. So the idea that this is just an isolated case of one person casting a ballot illegally is simply false. There was a case in Birmingham in which there was a tip-off that somebody was filling in postal votes in a warehouse. The police were dispatched to this warehouse to discover that about 200 postal votes had been completed by this individual. They went back to the police station, and the sergeant said, "What did you find?" And they said, "We found somebody filling in postal votes." Said, "I don't think they're supposed to be doing that. You better go back." They duly went back, took the votes, and they were emptied into the count and counted as part of that election. So voter fraud does happen. I think it's incredibly sad we've had to introduce this legislation. I'd really rather it hadn't had to happen, but it is now going to ensure that every single vote that is cast at this election is cast freely and fairly.
Apart unless you have an ID.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you all for those answers. Finally then, how would you use your influence as local MP to ensure that there is more equality in the funding for education in Cambridge? Because Cambridge is Cambridgeshire notoriously, you put it, not as much per pupil as in a great many other areas. Pippa.
Yeah, I think this is one of the areas where a constituency MP, you can't solve the whole education puzzle and the funding puzzle, just as we can't solve the whole NHS puzzle, but you can fight for your constituency's share of this. And it's been known for a long time that in terms of education in Cambridgeshire, perhaps because of misguided levelling up policies, I'm not sure, but it was felt that we could kind of be okay. We could deal with this. But knowing that Cambridge is one of the most unequal cities, and if we lead that out to South Cambridge as well, the greater Cambridge area, we are looking at areas of huge inequality, especially when we talk about issues about housing and that lack of public transport for young people to get to where they can. So the issues of inequality are really clear. I know that in Queen Edith's, the 2 primary schools have been served a notice that they are deeply in deficit, and that's been served by the local authority just ahead of the new term that they will be coming in. We're looking at those both incredible primary schools here in Queen Edith's, facing the most awful decisions. And the reasons that they're in the deficit is, one, because of staff illness, because of the stress and the workloads and just the situations they're dealing with such an overwhelmed system and under-resourced system. And the second is about the provision for special educational needs. The county council signed what I call a kind of Faustian pact with the government. The government said that big black hole that you have in the county council budget for special educational needs, we can't see that in the budget. We will give you this amount of money if you take all of the rest of that deficit out of the budget and you just accept that this is the money you have and you use that money, and we don't see the rest of the needs. So that has then had to be passed down to the educational establishments, to our schools. If I, as your MP, I would fight to make sure that we've got proper funding for special educational needs, proper funding for Cambridgeshire schools, both primary and secondary, and that would be the first job I would be looking at doing. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pippa. And we'll hear from Miranda next.
Thank you. Well, this question really goes to the heart of, why am I standing for Parliament? I find, locally whether it's, discussing issues on Facebook or talking to friends down the pub, the core of so many of the difficulties that our local authorities have is down to the funding that's, given down to them from the government, whether it's in the government grant or other means. And I realise that it's all very well shouting at the county council or the district council, but actually a lot of these decisions are made in Westminster, and that's why I'd like to be part of those decisions made in Westminster. Having said that, I think we have to be realistic about how much influence can one constituency MP really have. We have, for the past 14 years, after all, had Conservative MPs in this constituency who were in government. And I'm sure I remember from skimming through some of Antony Brown's most recent newsletters, he was railing about the unfair funding for our area for schools, and he was in government, so how come he didn't do anything? Obviously, I would be an elected Green MP, and as elected Green MPs, we will push for, I think it's another, where's my crib sheet, another £8 billion to school funding, including a £2 billion uplift for teachers. So we would be pushing for an uplift for schools nationwide, and obviously if I was your constituency Green MP, I would be pushing for to even up that fairness. But yeah, that's what I would do my best, that's all I can say.
Thanks very much, Miranda. And we'll go with Chris next.
So Miranda pointed to the campaign that my predecessor, Antony Brown, has rightly been waging on the inequality when it comes to school funding, particularly for rural constituencies and particularly for South Cambridgeshire. So absolutely the answer is yes. We need to secure greater funding, both in terms of direct education funding, but also the infrastructure that we see in our schools. On special educational needs, of course, we have delivered a new school, some of you might be aware of it, which is located in the village of Gamlingay, which is in the top left of the constituency area, and that was in direct response to the need put forward by parents in that region. So that is a new school that has gone in under this government that is specifically to meet those requirements. So I would concentrate on getting greater funding, ensuring that we are delivering more apprenticeships. I think many of you have probably met young people who've done apprenticeships and found them hugely rewarding as part of their education experience, supporting parents with our 30 hours of free childcare, and I've spoken to many people who are benefiting from that policy, having initially introduced 15 and then moved up to 30 hours per week. We should concentrate on proven policies that are working to drive down inequality, and not ideological attacks, and I'm sure Luke will touch on this in a moment, like charging 20% on independent school fees. Those people in the room who have their children at independent school fees, and many who have contacted me are not in a financial position that some might imagine and are going to find being hit with that additional 20% per child extremely difficult, probably taking their children out of independent schools and then trying to put them into local state schools that do not have the capacity. So I'd concentrate on what we can do on funding inequality rather than ideological attacks.
Thank you, Chris. Finally then to Luke.
Chris is right when he says that we receive the lowest percentage of funding when it comes to education, which is quite strange considering, it's Cambridge. We would expect it to have quite a lot of funding compared to the rest of the council areas, but actually we get some of the lowest, and that is a massive problem. So I'm going to talk about a bit about state schools. I'm going to firstly talk about what we want to do. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to have 3,000 new nursery places in primary schools as an addition to the primary schools. We want to have 6,500 new teachers in specialist subjects, especially like maths. We have a situation at the moment where a lot of maths classes are actually being taught either by substitute teachers or by teachers of other subjects to fill those positions. And we also want to have free breakfast clubs, which will really ramp down on what we have issues with childhood poverty and with inequality as well. Now, how are we going to pay for that? Because that's the question that's going to get asked of us. Well, you have all these lovely ideas. How are you going to pay for it? And what we're going to do, as Chris rightly pointed out, is remove a tax break that currently exists on private schools and invest that money directly into the state education system. Now, Chris calls it an ideological attack, but quite frankly, my parents worked very, very hard as well growing up. My dad's a self-employed carpenter, worked 6 days a week, still the hardest person I know working, in my opinion. We couldn't afford to go to private school. We didn't have that opportunity, but my parents had exactly the same aspirations for me as any parent does in this country. It's not a question of my dad just needing to work harder. That was the case that we were in, and I find it a bit crazy when we're in a situation where I remember going to state school. My school was built in the 1950s, and I remember opening the window, and the window fell through. That's the state of our state education system at the moment. We need to have investment in it, and if we don't get investment in it, we're going to have a problem, and that's where we have to get the money from. I understand it's going to be, politics is about choices, and every single policy will affect somebody. But this is a policy that we feel isn't required in order to invest in our state education system.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, everyone. We are at the end of this particular part of the hustings. I know that many of you will probably have questions to ask of the panellists, and I'll be staying around for a little while to hopefully answer some, if not all of them, if they can. For now, though, please show your appreciation for the panel.